भारत कीर्ति सीरीज।
One of the manifestations of which is Ahalya. Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Coral. That's one important distinction we need to make. The women of 21st century, at least Indian women, need to make. Separating femininity from the Western construct of feminism, which arose from as an answer to its own problems faced in the West. But it's very important that we get back to the spirit of our ancestors, to get back to that ideal society, state of society. So coming back to Subedha ji, so your passion for ancient history made you leave Indian Revenue Services to
Yes,
pursue
indeed.
your study and passion of history. So Subedha ji is the author of a very successful bestseller series based in Mauryan, India, called Urnagi. Do please check
And
out those.
here is the book
And
so that
oh
you can
yes,
see it.
I think the second book is slated for release.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, the second book is slated for release in a few months. Yes. This is the second one. Yes,
Yes.
on your
And,
screen. Yeah.
sure. Oh wow. So all the best for that. And Subedha ji also runs a web series called Maurya Lok, where she explains the concepts that existed in ancient India, and she does a great job doing that in that. And more important is her work on Ramayana, which is less talked about. In particular, the illustrated Ramayana by Rana Jagat Singh of Mewad, which is known for its very rich paintings. And a very important part of that Mewad Ramayana was not available to the world, the Aranya Kanda, which is exactly the game changer point of Ramayana. And Sumedha ji was instrumental in bringing it to all of us. So thank you, Sumedha ji, there.
My pleasure.
So would you please explain to us about your whole experience of studying the Mewad version of Ramayana, and about your work in conserving the intangible heritage of oral traditions?
Yes.
I guess you are also a part of South Asian outreach.
Of the Los Angeles
from
Library,
by
yes.
Los Angeles Library system.
Yes. So thank you, Sai. That was a very nice introduction of mine. Today I want to speak about the Ramayana as a personal experience, as an Indian phenomena, and as a world phenomena. So I read the Tulsi Ramcharitmanas when I was about 9 years old, and that started me off on a lifelong journey of engaging with the Ramayana. Now, how have I engaged with the Ramayana? Not just as a book, as a text, as a composition, but as part of life. Meenakshi ji was telling us that art, architecture, painting, everything is imbued with and immersed in two big story clusters of our country. These are the two pillars of Indic civilization, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So for my own, there has to be something cosmic and divine about it. I have always been attracted to the story of Ram, and this has been a passion. So I learned Sanskrit for myself, and I had this opportunity to translate the text written by Mahatma Hiranandji. Of course, it's the same as the Valmiki Ramayana, and also to play a role in bringing out this Mewad Ramayana. Before I start on that, I just want to think a little bit about the story. Imagination, telling stories, that's what makes us human. So that is extremely important in our civilization. Why? Because we are an oral tradition civilization. The idea of smriti and shruti is extremely important for us. So these stories, these oral tellings and retellings, which carry our culture, which carry our symbols, which carry our lives with them, they are of paramount importance to us. And of course, the Ramayana is one of these. I will speak about this in the next 5 minutes, but this is important not just for India but also for the world. You were talking about intangible heritage. So the Ramayana is a prime example of intangible heritage, which is also called living heritage. What is this? This is defined by UNESCO as that heritage which is transmitted from generation to generation through our ideas, systems, knowledge, skill, capability. You know, like maybe the people who have an expertise in Harikatha, they teach their children how to tell the Harikatha to everyone, and there are millions, literally millions of things like this. So the way the intangible heritage has been defined and the way it has been decided to focus on it, the Ramayana in India is one of the biggest examples. And I attended the World Living Heritage Conference 2 years ago, and we had a little bit of a discussion on how that definition could be tweaked to make it more applicable to the way our whole lives are subsumed by, consumed by, and included in the way the Ram Katha goes, the way we see Ram and his entire family and friends dealing with life. So that's as far as the importance of the Ram Katha goes. What about the Mewar Ramayana? The Mewar Ramayana, when it was originally commissioned, has a very interesting story, and when in 2014 and 2016 it was redone, that story is equally interesting. So Rana Jagat Singh was the great grandson of Rana Pratap. So they had a very debilitating fight with the Mughals, and they could not win. So by the time Rana Jagat Singh was on the gaddi, they had a kind of very vassalish association with the Mughals, which Rana Jagat Singh did not like. There was always a lot of push and pull. So the Mughals had asked Rana Jagat Singh or all the Ranas of Mewar not to build Chittor, rebuild Chittor. So at the end of his reign, nearing the end of his reign, Rana Jagat Singh decided to do two things. He rebuilt the walls of Chittor and he commissioned the Jagat Singh Ramayana in 1649. How was this also an act of defiance? Because the Sisodias of Mewar think of themselves as Suryavanshis. So they are in the same lineage as Ram. So this was a family history for them. And in this family history, the paintings that were made, Ram was in the image of Rana Jagat Singh, and the Mughals were the ones who were made as Ravan and all the Asurs. So the symbolism is very, very clear. So you see, in this also, in this particular Mewar Ramayana, there is an element of defiance, of angst, of currents of that time's history. What happened after some time? After another 200-300 years, we were under the yoke of the British. So in the early 1800s, Mewar had a political agent, a British political agent called Colonel James Todd. So the Rana at that time, a very, very weak ruler, obviously, because he was completely controlled by the British. He presented most of the folios of this Jagat Ramayana to Colonel James Todd in 1828, between 1818 and 1828. Then this went off to the UK. It was sold to the Duke of Sussex. The Duke of Sussex sold it to the British Library, and there were 4 kandas of the Ramayana in the British Library. The rest of it was dispersed to people in India. It was also, much of it was stolen, and it reached some art dealers, etc. So what happened in 2014? In 2014, the British Library decided to recreate it. Can you see some parallels with rebuilding the Ram Janmabhoomi? Although the persons who were instrumental were not people who were either Indians or Hindus. But I will mention my co-author J.P. Losty, because he was the one responsible for finding these neglected folios in the British Library in the 1970s, bringing them out, rereading them, understanding them to be Rajasthani paintings and not Mughal paintings, because they have a much older provenance with the Chaupan Shikhar style of painting. And in 2014, all this was decided to be put together in a digital Ramayana. In 2016, the Mewar Ramayana was commissioned, and as I said, when my publisher sent me the selected pictures and I realized that the Aranyakand wasn't there, I said, this can't be, this cannot work. And an ex-bureaucrat can still pull a few strings in the government. So I tried my best for the sake of art, for the sake of the Ramayana, and we did get 10 paintings from the Aranyakand into this particular Mewar Ramayana. So, you know, you've seen the picture of the Mewar Ramayana. I will show it to you again. Look at this. Maybe if you could, focus on this. This is the size and construction is tried to be made as much like a pothi of old as possible. So this was a 2016 recreation, rebuilding of the Mewar Ramayan of the 17th century, although it is written in English, and that's where I come in. People who don't understand Sanskrit, so then you have to write in English for them. But we 125 paintings out of 413 were selected, and we try to recreate it in as authentic a manner as possible. So, as I will end with saying that the currents of history are always controlled or carried along by the Ram Katha story. Today's building of Ram Janmabhoomi is a part of history which we are seeing in front of our own eyes. And I will talk again about how the Ramayana is a palimpsest of history and how we project ourselves on it always. So the Ram
Yes.
Katha is always fresh. It's always pertinent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Again brings to my mind, Sumedha ji. So we study history, we study spirituality, and still there are certain elements who play divisive, all kinds of divisive cards. And the latest one that I've heard is Ram is a North Indian god. Uh,
That's funny.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
actually
personally,
funny.
I have a lot of ammunition to, go back, saying how much Lord Ram is venerated in Telugu states, and, about the Ramayana reading month in Kerala. And
Bhadrachalam
you left
Ram.
us exactly, and you left us at a very interesting place where you were about to talk about the Vishwaroop of Ramayana, if I may call
Yes,
that,
yes,
the
yes,
Ramayana beyond India.
yes,
So let us talk a bit about Ramayana beyond India. And
yes. That is
before you answer, this is to our viewers. This is a great opportunity for you guys to interact and maybe ask some of your queries to Meenakshi ji, Coral, and Sumedha ji. Please type in your questions in the comments wherever you're watching it: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. And I think we'll try and get them answered by these stalwarts. So please, Sumedha ji, please.
yes. So I'll take off from what Meenakshi ji said, that the Ram Katha was already in vogue before Valmiki composed it. And remember, he didn't write it down; he composed it. And the Valmiki's Ramayana is the Adi Kavya. It is the strot from which you have all kinds of Sanskrit, Prakrit, and later languages. All compositions come from this Adi Kavya, which is why it is still relevant. It is still important to read the Adi Kavya. If we confine ourselves to India, there is no state, no region, no language in India in which the Ramayana has not been written, the Ram Katha has not been written. I mean, you look at the Kamba Ramayana if you want to go to the south. It is an astounding and astonishing piece of literature, and it is original in its own way. It's only the Katha which is the same. He puts it in his own way. And that is the crux of what I am going to say now. The Ram Katha has been used like clay by societies, cultures, people, intellects to press into it what they want impressed at that particular time in space and that time in their histories and in their evolution. It goes without saying that we have Ramayans across the country, but what about outside the country? I wonder if Sitanshu ji could put up those two maps that I have sent him, because I wanted to explain and bring out the fact that there are certain world trade routes which have existed for 3, 4, 5,000 years. And it is through these trade routes that these stories, look, this is a representation of the entire world. You can see land routes. Those black lines that you see are routes through which people, ideas, stories traveled. And the Ramayana, the Ram Katha, traveled through this. Through the land route, it went into Europe. Through the land route, it then went into Africa. Through the sea route. If I could have the other map now, Sitanshuji, the Indian Ocean littoral. So this Indian Ocean littoral was the most important place in the ancient world. Almost all ancient civilizations are along these shores only. And through these sea routes, this story went to Southeast Asia, it went to China, it went to the Gulf, it went to Africa. In Europe, it became the Odyssey and the Iliad of Homer. And in other countries, I mean, there are so many examples and we have very little time. I will give you a couple of examples. For example, in Indonesia, you have something called the Kakawin Ramayan. Now, what does the Kakawin Ramayan do? It takes the small character of Narad, makes it very big, turns it into a jester, gives him 3 assistants. And what is the role of the clown and these assistants? During each performance, they talk about the current political and social scenario of the place where the performance is taking place. So here it is, the story which is of some long ago king becomes topical immediately, because the people are talking about the things that influence them immediately. And then you have the gamelan orchestra of Java along with the Vayankulit puppetry. This is nothing but the Ram Katha. It went from Odisha through the route of the seas. The Ravan Chaya and the Chau dance influenced this gamelan orchestra and the Vayankulit very, very directly. And some of the retellings of the Ramayana, for example, the Bhatti Kavya of the 5th century was also disseminated far and wide in the Southeast Asian countries. And this Bhatti Kavya was another Sanskrit retelling of the Valmiki Ramayana. You had the Raghuvansham, of course, which is very, very popular, but the Bhatti Kavya. And then, the Uttaram Charit of Bhavbhuti, which is very important because in that, Ram and Sita are not separated at the end, they come together. So, Bhavbhuti could not tolerate the idea of his ideals living their lives separately. So, in the Uttaram Charit, they come together and they live together happily ever after. So, you see, so many versions of the Ramayana have been written. What is important to note? It is important to note that current situation, current concerns, the things that are important to people at that time are projected onto this story. So, then you have the Chinese Ramayana, which is a kind of takeoff on the Buddhist Ramayana. They had the Dashrath Jatak and the Anamak Jatak, and this reached Xinjiang and it reached Khotan. So, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Vientiane, Japan, Burma, Sri Lanka, I mean the list is endless and I cannot possibly explain all of it over here. The important thing to note is just that the Ramayana is a kind of blank slate. It becomes, the Ram Katha becomes a blank slate on which everyone writes their own story, and that is why it is forever relevant. Today, everyone engages with the Ramayana. So, all those fierce feminists who hate Ram, they also engage with the Ramayana. People like me and Sai Swarupa who believe in Sri Ram, we also engage with the Ramayana. Academics, intellectuals, there is nobody who can escape this story. Everyone engages with it. And why is it that for the current Indic revival, the Ram Janmabhoomi temple has become a catalyst? It became a center. I believe it is because the Ram Katha has this internal quality of being relevant and of pushing destiny, as it were. And it has pushed us also to rethink so many things. Since the 80s, when this revival began in earnest, the Ram Katha and Ram have again become the center of a political, social, intellectual and indigenous revival of India. And I told you about Rana Jagat Singh. That was his way of railing at or showing his angst and anger. In every age, the Ram Katha shows the happiness, the sorrow, as I said. It is the palimpsest on which we keep writing our histories all the time. And if there is another panel like this happening 1000 years later, they will be discussing the same thing. Thank you.
Ankur Gaikwad wants to ask if any of the elements of Ramayana make it to the Hellenic
Yes,
Roman traditions and storytelling. Basically, Ramayana had its impact on the East, but did it have any impact on the West?
I think I'll take that question, Sai, because I mentioned Homer and Homer's Odyssey and Iliad. If you read the Odyssey and the Iliad, there are extreme parallels between the story there and the story of the Ramayana. Helen of Troy is abducted by Paris. Then there is a huge war to get her back from Paris. So then you have Menelaus, Hector, etc. And there are reams of literary books on which character of the Odyssey and the Iliad corresponds to which character of the Ramayana. Was Hector actually Hanuman? Was Menelaus Ravan or Ram? Because remember, they turned it around to their own cultural context, and in that Helen is mistreated by Menelaus. She is not very happy with him. The ideas of that story, the elements and characters of that story have been taken, but Homer, of course, puts it in his own way, and the effect of Homer on Roman as well as Greek traditions has been absolutely huge. So that is the European echo of the Ram Katha.
Sure, that's very nicely put, Sumedha ji. In fact, even in the European popular culture, right? I think there was some movie of Tarzan which came in 2016. I saw so many parallels to Ramayana. So, are there any more queries, Team KLF?